All right, I am ready. I'm ready to go. We're going to go ahead and get started here. As you guys are coming in, if you haven't done it already, go ahead and find the Q&A box so you know where to type in the questions as we move forward. And then also go ahead and go into the chat box and just type in there where you are tuning in from. So we got Paul here from Columbus, Ohio, got Eric from DC, Jose from San Antonio, Brandon from Columbus, Ohio, Joseph from Long Island, New York, and I got Joe over there as well from Charlotte, North Carolina, Jim in Scottsdale, Arizona, another Joe in New York, Ben from Clemson, South Carolina, Eric in Columbus, and then Marty in Boise, Idaho, Charles in Charleston, South Carolina, pretty close to us. Same thing with the Clemson and the Charlotte people there. Got Akila on with us from Chicago, and Josh from Nashville, Teresa from Bensalem, Pennsylvania, and then we have Rick from Austin and Bill from New York, and also have Charlene there that just typed in from New York City as well. So thank you guys all for joining us. I really do appreciate you taking some time out of your Friday afternoon to go over this very important topic that I think a lot of people talk about and sometimes have a hard time really implementing this. But I have a lot of questions that we ask before we hire a multifamily property management company for our group, but I wanted to condense it down to like the top 10 questions. Like if you were to ask no other questions, but these 10, these are the kind of questions that you should be asking your property management company before you hire them. And I'm talking about property management company for smaller multifamilies, but as well as the larger multifamilies at the same time. When I say larger, 100 units or more, smaller is usually anything less than 100. So these are some questions that you should be asking no matter what level or what size of property you are actually trying to acquire or get the information from. So first off, for those of you who don't know me, most of you probably already know me, but I'm Dan Handford. I'm one of the key principals and partners with a group called passiveinvesting.com. If for some reason you are interested in doing some passive investments, we'd love to have you as one of our investing partners on one of our future projects. So you can obviously go to passiveinvesting.com and fill out the investor form there if you're interested in that. I'm also the owner of 5 specialty medical clinics here in South Carolina. I have one in Columbia, Greenville, Charleston, Fort Mill, and North Augusta, and looking to expand as well as we move into 2019. I have about $125.3 million worth in my multifamily real estate portfolio, a little over 1,300 doors. In 2019, our goal is to acquire at least another 100 million, so we're trying to grow pretty quickly. I'm also the founder of the Multifamily Investor Nation, which is where most of you probably heard about me. And I also have, just today, we released, I'm usually supposed to be doing it on Mondays, but this is a Friday, and I just released the 4th episode of our weekly podcast, which is the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast, where we interview people, investors, multifamily investors that are actually getting deals done and actually closing them. And so we had a very interesting one that was just released today. It was one by Vinny Chopra. It was a project that he was able to acquire in 2014 for $3.55 million, I believe, and he sold it last year for a little over $8 million. So it was a good, nice 37% IRR on that particular project. So I would highly encourage you to subscribe to our podcast. It goes over a lot of details and the nuts and bolts. It's not a very fluffy a podcast at all. We get down to the nitty gritty and really dive deep into how people found deals, how they closed them, how they found the investors, and everything. So I would highly encourage you to do that. You can find it on iTunes. Just type in when you're searching for podcasts, Multifamily Investor Nation, and it'll pop up. So you can definitely do that. I'm also the co-host of the Tough Decisions for Entrepreneurs podcast, which I host alongside my wife. This is just a little bit about me as well. This is a picture of my family. I'm married, have 4 children. You can see there on the bottom right-hand corner, Chloe. In the middle is my son, Caleb. And then I have Caroline there to my right, as you're looking at the screen, on the Splatosphere at the Mall of America. That's our oldest child. Caleb's our second, so she's actually 8 now, and Caleb is 6. Chloe is 2.5, almost 3. Well, I guess she's more like 2.5, but anyway, she's starting to act a lot older nowadays, on the top left-hand corner is, of course, our youngest child. She just turned 1 year old. And actually, tonight we're going to be celebrating her 1-year birthday. So it was actually last week, I believe, or the week before, but we were a little bit busy and got a little behind. So we're going to be doing it tonight. After we get done with this, I'm going to go over to the house and get things prepared and have a little birthday party for her. Top right-hand corner, and a couple other places you can also see my wife, Danae. So she's there helping us out a lot. And if it weren't for her, I wouldn't be able to provide as much education as I do for you guys. So I'm very, very thankful for her. So let's go over these top 10 questions when trying to hire, trying to find that right multifamily property management company. So first thing you want to ask, and again, I want to, let me just back up here for just a minute. So I want to go over a couple of things first. So when we talk about these top 10 questions, some of these questions might be obvious to you, okay? But there's going to be other ones that maybe you hadn't thought of before, and maybe they're new to you. And so I would highly encourage you to get out a piece of paper, get out a notebook pad, and start to write some of these things down. That way you can start to formulate your own questionnaire or interview form for your own group, so that whenever you try to go into a new market and you're looking for a new property management company, you know exactly what you're going to be asking them, and you can have some documentation to support that. So you want to obviously ask these questions so that you can assure yourself to find, or at least be better at finding, a property management company that will be for your property. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is that if for some reason you made the mistake of hiring the wrong property management company, you need to learn to be quick to fire if they are not performing. Obviously, giving them some specifics on different targets and goals you want them to be, but if they are not performing, you need to make sure that you let them know that. You need to make sure that you are quick to fire them, because even if you don't have outside investors, they are responsible for your money. Because if they aren't going to get that asset performing, you need to find somebody that will. The other thing that I will tell you is that as you're looking for this property management company, you really need to find somebody that is local. Okay. You don't want to have a regional company. I prefer to have somebody who is local to the market. They have some deep knowledge of the market, and it's okay if they're in multiple markets, but I don't want to be the only property. I don't want to be the only property that is in my market where I have my property. There are usually several other groups that you could probably find. Obviously, the smaller the market, the harder it might be to find, somebody who has a really deep knowledge of it. But in most markets, you should be able to find somebody who is local to that market. The other thing that this property management company should do for you is that as you are looking for various assets, whether it be smaller or mid-size or large, they need to be alongside you and helping you create the pro formas and the projections on what they think that they can do to perform that asset. So before you decide on one, when you first enter a market, you want to have 2, 3, 4, 5 different ones, depending on how many are available in that market. Create some of these pro formas for you. And then once you start to make a decision and you hire one for a market, they're going to work with you alongside you and create some of these projections and these pro formas to make sure that you can actually acquire that property and perform the way you've done historically on some of the other assets that they have managed, but also the ones that they are currently managing with you as well. Now, the last thing I'll tell you about the property management companies, and before we get into some of the questions, is that you have to understand that as you are interviewing them, they at the same time are interviewing you. And so they're going to probably have their own list of questions and criteria that they're going to ask you as well. So don't just think this is a one-sided game. This is just like any other type of interview, job interview. Like when you have an employee sitting across from you and you're looking to interview them to hire you, to hire them, they're also interviewing you at the same time. So you have to always keep that in the back of your mind and understand that they need to meet you where you want them to be, but they also have to you have to also understand that they need you to meet them where they are. And that's where you need to talk about a lot of those things ahead of time, because sometimes you aren't going to be a good fit because your goals and your thoughts are not aligned with each other. You need to make sure that you guys have thoughts, and you need to make sure that your plans are aligned with each other at the same time. So the first question I want to go over is how long have you been in business? So the newer the company, obviously, it's not going to have as much experience managing, several different types of assets and sizes and various things like that. I've seen property management companies that have really large portfolios, and they have anything from, 4, 5, or 6 units all the way up to over 6, 7, or 800 units in one property. So you need to make sure that whatever asset class that you're trying to acquire, that hopefully they have experience managing that type of an asset class. You don't want to try to fit a square peg in a round hole, right? You don't want to find somebody who has only managed 50 units or less to try to convince you that they can manage 100 units or more. There's a different dynamic and there's different things happening. Now, you might think, well, how are they ever going to learn? Well, they can find somebody else that wants to be their guinea pig. I don't want to be the one to be their guinea pig for them to learn on my behalf. I don't want them to learn on behalf of my investors. I want to make sure I have somebody who has a deep knowledge of the market, who has lots of experience managing assets that are the same class as mine as well. And the other, well, we'll get into. I was going to say something else just came to my mind about that, but I believe we're going to be getting to that as well. But I'll just go ahead and cover it here. And if we cover it again later, we can cover it again, or I'll just skip it. But so there's obviously the certain size property, so the number of units that they're going to be managing, but there's also the type of property it is. So like the actual class of the area and class of the property. Meaning, do they have experience managing only Class A's? Well, they're probably not going to be that good managing a value add reposition from a C to a B, because it's a totally different business model, totally different business plan. You don't want to be trying to put, again, a square peg in a round hole by having them manage a property that they've never had an opportunity to manage before. So you don't want to just be that guinea pig for them. They should have experience. They should have experience in value add multifamily, because that's what our group does. And they need to have a track record. And in that track record, they need to have people they can put us in contact with, that we can reach out to them and see, their experience with that particular group. You also want to make sure that, in addition to, how long have they been in business, what are the areas that they serve? Are they regional? Are they national? All over the place can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. If they're all over the place and they don't have a lot of people in one market, then they might be spread too thin and spread too far across all the states, that you're not going to have the oversight that you want to have, especially if you're doing a heavy lift or a heavy reposition, or even just a moderate reposition or value add play. You need to have a little bit more oversight on that particular asset. The next question here is what asset class do they have experience managing? That's why I kind of already covered this. So I'm not going to go over this in too much detail. We'll probably just skip to the next one, because I know I told you I'd be right about that 30, 45-minute mark, and then we'd open it up for some questions. But you want to make sure that they have experience managing value-add projects. So most of you are probably in that space of value add BC class properties, where there's some deferred maintenance, some interior renovations, a little bit of exterior renovations, but you need a management company that knows how to perform there. And you need to make sure that they provide you with a breakdown of all of the various asset classes that they have in their current portfolio, but you could also have them give you like some of the prior portfolios that they used to manage and give you some statistics on how well they did. What was the economic occupancy of that property? What was the physical occupancy of that property? You want to know those kind of numbers, because if they don't have those properties now, maybe there's a reason why they don't have them now. Maybe they didn't have a very good track record of performing with them, and even though that they've managed it in the past, that doesn't mean they managed it very well. Maybe it's in the past because they didn't manage it very well. So you want to make sure you ask some of those questions. And, they could lie to you. They could tell you, yeah, we used to manage this asset. We had it at 97% the whole time we had it. And, that might not be the truth, but that's where you also have to have a little bit of faith, a little bit of trust and experience, and asking people around that area and that market, if they know who this person is and the experience level that they have. The next question is, do they help with due diligence, or is there a cost with the due diligence process? So you want to find a property management company that is on board with helping you through that due diligence process. Most of your property management companies will provide you with the service of helping you with the due diligence with no charge to you unless you don't close the deal. So for example, they will help and bring a team together and walk every single one of the units that you purchase, and they won't charge you for that service and bringing those people there to help, because they're hoping to win your business, or to have that property. And even if you have 3 or 4 properties with them, they still do that because they want to make sure that you don't go somewhere else, right? And hire somebody else to do that. And so you want to make sure that they are heavily involved in that process, and that they don't charge you up front, that they charge you if for some reason you don't close. Normally, there's an agreement in place in most of the projects that we've done where they'll have you sign an agreement ahead of time that they're going to perform these due diligence items. They'll usually do lease audits. They'll usually do some of the financial due diligence. They'll look at the income, the T12 and the rent roll, and compare that to their projections on the pro formas of what they think they can handle the property. And then they also will walk every single one of the units along with you. And so they usually should have a very streamlined process for doing that. And if for some reason you don't close, there's usually, $30 to $50 fee per unit that they might charge you. And that's just the risk that you take of, not being able to close the deal and then them charging you for doing that due diligence because you didn't use them. Now, most of the ones that we've worked with, they will give you the option of, you can hire us to do the due diligence. And even if you don't choose us, it's not just that you don't close. You could close it, but then choose another property management company, and you just have to pay them for those due diligence efforts. And so there's a couple of different ways that agreements are set up for that, but it's usually done in writing before they start that due diligence process, and it's usually per unit fee. There's a per unit fee if you don't actually close that project, or if you choose to go with a different property management company. The next thing here is you want to make sure you get the names of properties in that market that they currently manage. And the reason why this is important is because not only, as I talked about earlier, do you want to get some names of some people that you can actually call and contact and reach out to get their, like a testimonial, if you will, or kind of a client referral, not really referral, but really just, hey, I've used these people for 3 years, 4 years, 20 years, 30, whatever. They're great. They do an amazing job. They're very responsive. But in addition to that, go drive by some of the properties and go visit those properties and pretend to be a prospective tenant. Go in there and see how are the property managers on site trained. If there is no property management on site, how long does it take for them to actually get there to be able to show you the property and get very familiar with how they handle their other assets. And then you could also ask them to go one step further here is how many of these or do they own any properties themselves? Because there may be some conflict of interest there too, that, if your property is a mile down the road from a property that they own, and they might, turn on patients. I'm thinking medical. They might turn some prospective tenants over to that property that they own versus, yours that you actually would have a mile down the road. And so you want to make sure you ask those kind of questions at the same time. The next thing here is what is their process for maintaining the online reputation? Now, I know a lot of you do this yourself already. Before you go to a restaurant, before you go see a doctor, there's things that you do online by looking at these online reviews. And so the same thing occurs when people are when they're looking for a place to live. They're looking for their next home. They're looking for that apartment community that they want to be able to call home and be a part of. The people are looking at these reviews. And so you want to ask them, what do they do to maintain their ranking? So apartments.com has their own online ranking system. So what are they doing to manage that? Are they currently asking existing, residents to, provide them with those testimonials? Because I'll tell you that most of the properties that we acquire have not so good reviews. And the reason why is because we do buy value add properties. And so there might be some, mismanagement of the property, and the property management, the prior property manager did some things to kind of tarnish their reputation in the community and things like that. So you want to make sure that they have a process for mitigating the risk of the bad reviews, but also for getting good positive reviews. And then maybe even asking them, if there's a lot of bad reviews, do they recommend doing a complete rebrand? If you have a lot of bad reviews, you could counteract the bad reviews with good reviews. Because I think for me, when I look at reviews, if I see a 5 out of 5 and there's like 100 reviews, it doesn't really help me very well. But if I see reviews that have 90 good reviews and there's like a smattering of like 5 to 10, bad reviews, it kind of makes sense, because I mean, even some of the best restaurants, so I've been to some really nice restaurants in New York City and all over the place, and they are like top notch, and they don't even get a 5-star review, right? It's because everybody is not gonna have the same experience, or you try your best to do it, but there's gonna be a certain number of people that are gonna always be a little bit difficult. But you want to make sure that you're getting those good reviews, and the only way you're going to get them is if you train those the on-site property managers, or if you don't have on-site, training your property management company to be able to get those online reviews. They should be looking at the apartments.com reviews. They should be looking at the Facebook reviews, and they should be looking at the Google reviews. Those are the 3 review sites that they need to be looking at. Apartments.com, Google, and then Facebook, making sure that they're actually doing that, because that can be a make or break into how many new prospective tenants come into your property. And also, if you have a lot of bad reviews, I would highly recommend considering doing a rebrand, completely changing the name of the property. That way you can wipe the slate clean, get a new Google account with 0 reviews, start fresh, do the same thing with Facebook, new Facebook page, new set of reviews, and then also on apartments.com. So making sure that those reviews don't follow you when you acquire that property, because hopefully you are going to be managing that property better than the last guy. So this next question is, are there in-office systems or processes or procedures, and are they written down? Okay, because you want somebody that can immediately execute on a takeover upon acquisition. You don't want someone that has to sit there for months on end and trying to figure all this stuff out. That's why you want to ask them how long they've been in business, and then also asking this question of, are your processes and your systems and everything that you do, is it all written down? Do you have procedure manuals that the moment you take over this property, you could be in there training that property manager on site, or at least being able to have a system in place so that everybody knows exactly what's supposed to happen the moment you close on that property? Do you have checklist protocols? Do you have checklists for incoming residents, residents that are leaving? Do you have a process for getting those online reviews that we just talked about? Is there a system that is already in place to make it easy so that they can train a new on-site property manager upon takeover, especially with some of these larger properties? And also making sure that in addition to their systems and procedures and processes, whatever renovation plan that you have set in place, is that written down? You need to make sure you have those questions, those questions with your property management company of, how long is it going to take to turn these units when we're doing the renovation plan? How are they going to maintain the occupancy levels that you have projected in your underwriting model, before taking over the property? What are some of the goals that you guys have decided on they're going to put into place for the leasing agents when those new properties, when those new units start to come available? So, and lastly here, what about the marketing plan? If you don't write down the plan for the marketing, it's never going to get done. And just to say, oh, we do apartments.com, that's not enough. That's not enough in this day and age to be able to fill an apartment complex and to fill it efficiently. There are a lot of other ways. Google, Facebook, all kinds of things that you can do, and even going to local businesses and going in there as well. Next thing here is obviously, you're going to be asking them about their fee, right? So what is their management fee? And so typically, if you're going to be in the 100 units or more space, the typical range is going to be about 3 to 5%. I've seen it as low as 2.5%, even sometimes 2%, but that's usually somebody who has a very large portfolio that one group is managing. And so they've been able to, due to the economies of scale, reduce that fee overall. And then if it's under 100 units, well, let me back up for just a minute. So over 100 units, 3 to 5%. That does not mean that you won't have any other fees associated with the property management, because typically on properties that have 100 units or more, there is on-site property management. So there's an on-site property manager, and there's usually at least one maintenance person. So you have at least 2 people, sometimes up to 4 or 6 or even more, depending on how many units you have. As the more units you get, the more people you're going to have on staff. But you'll be paying for that payroll, and then you will also be paying for the property management fee on top of that. And that'll all be baked into your underwriting. So it should be all part of that process before you acquire the property. And then under 100 units will be more like around, I've seen it as low as like 5, 6, 7%, but even as high as like 10, 11, 12%. Depends on the area, depends on the asset class, depends on how heavy of a lift it is, and sometimes it depends on how far away it is from the property manager or from the property management company. If they're off site and they have to drive 20 or 30 minutes because it's a little bit rural, it's gonna cost you a little bit more on that fee. But you also want to make sure you clarify with the property management company what that fee is based on. Is it based on gross rents, or is it based on all the collected income, which includes some of the other income like your laundry as well, or your valet trash, or whatever additional amenities are on top of that, or even the utilities at the same time? So is it just the gross rents, or is it all the collected income, which includes that other income column as well? And also make sure that you get clarification on, is it an all-inclusive fee, or does it only, or are some of the other fees like cleaning fees and deposits and move-in fees and application fees, are some of those actually passed on to the property management company? And so I have seen that too, where somebody's paying 8, 9, 10% for property management, and then the property management company also gets paid for the application fees and the deposits and all of that kind of stuff. So that was, in this particular case that I'm thinking, it was actually, they didn't find that out until they actually closed on the property and they took it over and they already had an agreement in place. Most of the property management companies that we have, they don't have a long-term contract with it. Now, obviously, if you're trying to negotiate like a 2%, yeah, you're going to probably have to sign some sort of a contract or an agreement to be able to be with them for a longer period of time. But I would suggest making sure that there is no contract in place. It's month to month, and that way they know that they have to continue to perform, or you can drop them at any time given that 30-day notice. The next question here is what's included in their management fees. So this is kind of something I kind of already covered this with the last question about what's included. You want to make sure, again, that it's all inclusive, and then do they charge any other like one-time fees, like even additional fees like leasing fees or vacancy fees, setup fees or late fees or anything like that. And then lastly, if you're doing this value add play, how many of those or how much do they charge on top of their fee for what's called a construction management fee? I've seen some groups, they just include it in their fee, and again, it's a true all-inclusive management fee, and that's it. But I've seen some charge like a lower management fee, like 3 to 4% or even 2.5%. But then when there's value add to be done, they charge an additional 5 to 7, maybe even 10% as a construction management fee. And that construction management fee is based on the overall CapEx budget or the actual renovation budget. So you just want to make sure that you get clarification on what are you actually going to be paying, and what those fees are all entailing. Another important question is, how much time does it take for them to make ready a unit once a tenant leaves? And this is kind of twofold. So how long does it take to make ready a unit and fully renovate the property based on the plan that is in place? And then how long does it take for a already fully renovated unit, when it turns over, to actually turn that one over? So you're gonna see that when you start to ask these questions up front to the property management companies, you're gonna be able to compare them from one property management company to another, and you're gonna have some that are going to be 24 to 48 hours, and you're going to have some that are going to be even more than that, sometimes 7, 10, 2 weeks or more. And so you need to make that decision of how fast are they going to be able to turn it over, because as you know, the longer a unit stays unturned, the more money that you and your investors are going to be losing in the long run. And then finally here, this last question that I have is all about technology. And so what technology are they using to make that property more efficient? I've seen some properties that we've been able to take over that have 4 units, and then all of a sudden we're able to drop it down to not 4 units, excuse me, that they have 4 people on site, and we're able to, maybe reduce that down to 3 people, or some properties that have 4 or 5 that reduce it down to 2 because of the use of technology. And so let me give you one example of what I mean by technology. So in one of the properties that we have, we went in and we were trying to figure out what's the process for the maintenance technician to be aware that there's been a maintenance ticket put in for a leaky faucet, if you will. Okay, and so what their process was before we took over the property was they were using a property management company, a property management software, web-based, and so the tenants had to call in. They had to call in, or they had to email, like just send a regular email, or they had to stop into the office to submit their request. So let's just say they called in, the front desk leasing agent talks to the person, gets their complaint, and then they open up their online management software, type it into the system, press save, tag it, they tag it to the tenant's property or unit and stuff, so the maintenance technician knows where to go, and then they manually print off a ticket, and they would walk it to the next room and put it in a little file folder that said, work orders to be completed. And then sometime through the day, the maintenance technician would have to walk from the shed across the street, walk over to the property management office, go into this room, find the tickets that say, work orders to be completed, pull those out, go back over to his office, his maintenance shed, and get all the tools and supplies or whatever necessary, go walk over to the property, go walk over to the unit, fix the issue. Then they would, write a little note on the piece of paper, leave one of the sheets of paper there in the unit so that the tenant knew it had been fixed. Take the other sheet that had been written on as well, and then he had to go walk it back down to that room inside the leasing office, put it in another bin that said work orders completed. And then sometime throughout the day, the leasing agent there that was part-time, or the full-time property manager that was on site, would have to go to that little room, which is in a separate room, look at the file folders. Oh, these have been completed. Pull those ones out. Then she would sit down at her desk and type up the notes that the technician wrote down on the piece of paper, and then they would press save. I thought that was the most inefficient way to handle maintenance requests, especially because the software we were using was actually Yardie Matrix software. It's called Yardie Voyager, I believe, or something like that. It's a very well-known, very enterprise level property management software, and it had the technology already built in to be able to do these maintenance requests. So we got an iPad with a rugged case around it, and we also hooked it up to the Wi-Fi, and it has caching ability, so that what that means is that they don't have to have the cell phone version or the data version of the iPad. Whenever they go to the tenant's property and fix the thing, they can, while they are there. Well, first let me walk back for just a minute. So he's sitting in his maintenance shed. Bing! He looks at his iPad. He sees that a new work order has been submitted by the tenant via the resident portal on the website. So now the residents are being trained to go to the website, type in their tickets themselves. So the leasing agent and the property manager on site don't have anything to do with it. It goes into the Yardie software, and then all of a sudden, bing, the iPad bings, and there's a work order that says, hey, get up off your haunches, stop smoking your cigarette, get to this work order, right? And so he sees the work order. He's already in his shed. He grabs his tools, goes to the unit, fixes it. While he's in there, he can type on the iPad exactly what happened, what went wrong, and he could press save, and it emails the tenant and tells them, hey, I was at your property. This is what happened. This is what I fixed. Let me know if you have any other issues. And he's done. There's nothing else. But he doesn't have Wi-Fi, obviously, when he's in those units. And so whenever he gets back to his maintenance shed, it'll automatically connect back to the Wi-Fi and submit the cache, the log of what he had done, and it's done. No paper, no legwork, no nothing. And you can now start to track performance of the maintenance technicians, because you can see now how fast they were able to complete the tickets based on when they saved and whenever they submitted and closed out those tickets. So now you can have performance measures for your maintenance technicians to make sure that they're actually getting things done in a timely fashion. Whereas before, you don't know when they got it done. It could have been a couple of days, even though they might have got it done in a few hours, but sometimes those things would just sit there for a day or two and nobody would put them in. And so now we have now freed up some time in the main office, where now these people can start to do the leasing agent, the property management manager now has time to do some other things, like maybe calling some past residents that didn't come in, or go following up with some people to make sure that they got scheduled for a tour of the property, or whatever the case may be. So that's one example of technology, and you want to make sure that's very important that they have experience with technology and you understand what technology they're actually using. And so resident portals are very important, making sure that there's a resident portal so they can easily submit the maintenance requests. It's easier on the property manager, it's easier on the maintenance technicians, and it is also easy on the residents. Now, the same thing with those on the maintenance requests, having the ability for them to be able to set up auto pay and collect their rent and stuff like that, their fees from that resident portal is important, but also making sure that there's a way for them to pay if they don't have a bank account, or maybe making sure that there's a way for them to submit maintenance requests without the portal. So one of the other things we did is, even if somebody doesn't have an email, in this day and age, it's very rare, but it's possible. Let's say they don't have email, they don't have the ability to go online, they don't have that online access. So if they can actually call in, and now they can press an option that allows them to leave a voicemail for their maintenance request, and then the maintenance technician gets that email, puts it in the system, and done. It's in the system, and then they can leave something in the unit for the repair that they do, so that they know that they were there instead of getting an email, since they didn't get an email. So some of the other things you want to make sure you consider when it comes to technology is, are there any additional fees like apartments.com, or even, we talked about property management fees. Are there any initial setup fees, or licensure fees, or anything like that goes on top of the property management? So smaller properties, under your 100 units, you might not have to have its own proprietary software, like just for your property. You might be using a group property management software that your property manager uses to keep track of everything. But in our situation, we always have our own software and license fees and things like that for every property, and so you have to make sure you are aware of that as well. And then also phone systems. Some of the properties that we've taken over have had antiquated phone systems, and they're paying 2 or 3 times more than they really need to, because they don't have the right phone system in place. So making sure that if you don't have that background in IT, that you get somebody in there to look at it and go, is there any way for us to change this process and change the way we're doing things to reduce the expenses, to be able to increase the returns? And then same thing with the answering service. Are you paying for an answering service that is not necessary, or that could be, reduced altogether? And what about cell phone use? Are you, purchasing cell phones and having a monthly fee for the property, or are you maybe just, offsetting some of the expense that the employees are using, that the employees are having by using their own cell phones? So I'm a big believer, but if you have the option of being able to pay, not have to sign contracts and buy phones and be responsible for possible repairs on phones and various things like that, I would suggest just offsetting your property management manager's cell phone if they're on site. Obviously, if they're not on site, I don't think you would necessarily need to do this, but on site people, maintenance person, the property manager, making sure that you just offset, pay $20, $30, $40 a month to offset their phone bill, so that you don't have to go get one for them, but you can still feel comfortable and have that equitable exchange for using their cell phone, for business related things. And then finally is IT departments. So we took over a property recently that had that the property manager, the property management company had what is called a IT department. And so when we started to dig in a little bit there, we started to see an extra monthly fee come onto our bill. And we were like, well, what is this for? And they said, well, this is our IT department. And I was thinking, okay, well, this has got to be third party. So of course I asked the question, is this your own IT department that you're charging us for, or is this third party? And come to find out, they don't have their own IT department. They charge us for them to hire somebody else to be their IT department. And it's a monthly ongoing fee that you pay for them to be available whenever you need to log into your computers to fix things. And so I'm looking at it and I'm going, we use online web-based property management software We use Outlook for the email, and then maybe Word and Excel, and that's it. Like, I can't figure out anything else what you would need a an IT department for. I mean, obviously you have networking and things like that, but with this day and age and having wireless internet and wireless this and that, I'm not sure what you're going to need. So I turned to the property manager who was on site, had been there for 18 months. And I said, have you ever actually used the IT department since you've been here or needed it at all? And she's like, no, not really. I'm like, exactly. I mean, for the amount of money that we were paying monthly, I could buy 2 or 3 new computers a year, even if something went wrong. So to me, it was worth it to me because, obviously I have a background in I won't say obviously, but I do have a background in IT and technology. And so I do have the ability to go in and help. And there has not been really very many situations or issues at all for me to do that, except for maybe the initial setup of like a scanner or a printer or, initial setup of the email system, but that's pretty much it. So that is all I had to cover. Those are my 10 questions, those top 10 questions that you need to ask a property management company before you hire them. So I went a little bit longer than I planned because I get a little bit passionate about certain things, but I want to see if any of you guys have any questions. If you do, right now, go ahead and type them right there into the chat box, and I will answer as many of them as possible. So Paul has a question here, not necessarily related to the property management company, but he's asking, are the investments not guaranteed like with a CD or FDIC? So that is correct, but a CD is not guaranteed either, meaning that a guarantee, when I think of a guarantee, Paul, I look at that and I go, I'm going to put $100,000 into a CD and I'm going to get 1%, 2%, or whatever. There is no guarantee that you're going to get that 1% or 2%. Now, they might guarantee you that, you're going to, if you put it in there for 6 months or 10 years or whatever, that you're going to get that. And maybe some places they do lock you in, but sometimes it's variable. But there is a guarantee that, if the bank goes defunct, obviously, then the FDIC steps in and gives you that. So there are some limitations there, but no, with all of that said, there are no guarantees with these investments, and they are not protected or anything like that. But if you look at the historical aspect of the multifamily, space, it is one of the most recession-proof asset classes, and it's one of the most forgiving asset classes when it comes to projections and performance at the same time. So hopefully I was able to answer your question there. Let's see if we have any more that come in. All right. Got 2 questions that just came in here. What strategies one could adopt for less than 100 units where one cannot have on-site property management? Well, I think it depends on where you see issues or where you see problems. I mean, I think, from my standpoint, I don't want to be in property management myself. So for me, I would be making sure that I found, because I even have a property in my portfolio that is 33 units, and we don't have on-site property management, but we do have a very solid off-site property manager that is near the property and that has experience in that market, and they can also set that up as well. They can not set that up. They can make sure that they are handling that type of an asset class. So I'm not sure what issues you may be referring to there, Hamid, but if you have any clarification on that, let me know. But the strategies, I would say you need to make sure that you find somebody, a property manager who is experienced for managing that smaller type of an asset, and that they're very responsive. Like, I don't want somebody who's not on site to take a week to show a property. If somebody calls them today, I want them to try to be there that day, if not within 24 hours, to show that unit, so I can make sure that I I can make sure that I get it rented and get it leased up. Let's see here. What are your thoughts? This is a question from Eric. What are your thoughts on hiring a property manager as an employee, salary plus equity, as opposed to being a client of a property management company, assuming this is a 150 unit asset class? So I think there's a lot of different things that you have to consider here, Eric, because number one of the reasons why I don't like property management companies to have equity in my properties is because what happens one day when they're not performing, because who knows, they might not perform the way you want them, and you have to kick them out, but they still own part of the property. Now, as long as that's discussed ahead of time, I don't think it would be as big of an issue. So I would still probably consider it, as long as we could come to a consensus that if they go below a certain target or occupancy level for a certain period of time, they're out of there, regardless as to whether or not they have any equity in the position. And that's obviously from a standpoint of the property management company. But same thing. I mean, if you're going to have the same issue, if you have an employee that you want to get rid of, but now they also have equity in the property, I mean, you're going to have a little bit of a conflict of interest there. So I'm not sure I would be the big fan of hiring a property manager, to give them equity in the project in exchange for being the property manager. I think you can probably find somebody that would be a lot, still be efficient for you, but and still give them some incentives on the property without giving them actual equity into the deal. The next thing of that was, hiring a property manager as opposed to being a client. I think as you get started, it's gonna be hard to make it work financially to manage your own property and maybe, work a job or something like that. And a lot of times the lenders don't like that. The lenders want to see, if you're new, that you have a property management company beside you helping you manage those projects. Now, once you get, a couple hundred units under your belt and you have over a year of experience managing those assets and they're all performing very well, yeah, you can show that experience level to the lenders and they might be able to allow you to start managing your own property. But even if you hire a property manager on the property and you don't have a third-party property management company managing them, you are still a property manager. You are still managing the property, because that's what the property management companies do. Those property management companies hire property managers to be on site. They hire the maintenance technicians to be on site. They give them the salaries and the bonuses. Of course, it's all paid out of the expense, the income off of the property. But those are usually employees of the property management company. And so the property management company worries about all the payroll and all that kind of stuff. And obviously the property is paying for that. So the next question here is from Jose. When you ask an established and experienced property management company for their pro forma numbers and their numbers are lower than your pro forma numbers, do you adjust your numbers to theirs so you can make a better purchase offer, or do you keep your original underwriting numbers? This is I think a deal specific question. It's not going to be the same for every single project, but let's just hypothetically say, Jose, that I was just entering a market. I'd never been into it before, and my numbers were higher, their numbers were lower. I would make sure that I compared more than just one property management company's pro forma. Don't just go off of just one person. Get 3, 4, 5 different property management companies to give you their pro forma numbers, and then figure out where everybody is and come up with a consensus around that. I mean, obviously you have the historicals. Hopefully you have the T12, maybe even the trailing 24 or 36, so you can see some historical numbers of how that property has been performing, and that's where it comes into more of an art to determine how much can you lower those expenses reasonably to be able to still give the investors that you're trying to present reasonable expectations and reasonable numbers. Jim is asking, do you also set up your own management software with the property management company? So typically we do not. So typically we don't set it up ourselves. We have the property management company who is going to be managing the asset. They'll usually already have a software that they're familiar with and that they have special licensing with and stuff like that they can add us on to theirs. And so we typically use the existing property management company's property management software. Luke is asking, should you be worried about hiring a big management company that owns a lot more units themselves than what you do? So yes, Luke, I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier, but yes, I would definitely be cautious of that. I think the biggest caution is where you have a property that you own and they're very close to your property, where there may be a conflict of interest there. And so definitely it's something to consider, and it's definitely something to make sure that you are asking around, and that you are asking that asking the property management company, how do they handle that? How do they mitigate those issues and that conflict of interest? Akila asks, what is the typical salary for an on-site property manager? This is going to be something that's going to be, market specific. So I've seen some as low as about 35, 40,000, and I've seen somewhere upwards to about, 60, 70,000, depending on the market. So the best thing to do there is to, whatever market you're going into, the property management company that you're working with should have the ability to come up with those numbers and tell you what you're going to need to pay to be able to find a good person. I'm a big believer in that. You don't want to go cheap with that property manager. You know, you don't want to just try to find the cheapest person, because you want to find someone that can manage that asset and manage it very well, because they're going to be your eyes and ears and nose and everything when you're not on that property, and you need to make sure that they are solid. Rama asks, do we need an independent audit of financials of the property manager? So I don't necessarily think that you need to do, it's required or it's needed or whatever. Usually, if you have a property management company, the property manager on site will manage a portion of the finances, and then the property management company will manage the rest of it. So all of the invoices that come in, they'll usually pay those and have the payables and stuff like that. And then if you choose to, or maybe if you're in a particular a registration with the SAC and you're required to do some more auditing, obviously you would have to do that. So there's certain requirements, like a registration A on the SEC, which is more of a fund style of registration. You do have to have those periodic, auditing of the financials. And then I know some syndications will optionally opt to tell their investors that once a year or once every other year, they will have the financials audited and available for review if they so choose to do that. But it is not something that we do as a normal practice. The next question is, if we are out of state buyer, what are the tips to make a check on properties and property manager? Well, I think one of the biggest things is, I think what you're referring to as far as the check is without them knowing, how can you check on your property to see if it's being handled properly? I think there's a couple of ways you can do that. So how do people find that property to be a prospective tenant? You can go to those websites, apartments.com, and pretend to be somebody else and see how fast and efficient they are handling those requests. Does it take them several hours or days to respond, or are they Johnny on the spot and they get a hold of them right away and respond to them? I think those are great things to do and to test. Same thing with how they're answering their phones, how they're responding to maintenance requests. So there's ways as far as maintenance requests, like that software, that you can really set some benchmarks to see how fast they're able to turn some of those tickets around. And then, of course, when you're talking about checking up on them and you're out of state, I would find somebody locally that you drive by the property and give you some pictures, and maybe walk in and do it. You could probably find somebody on Craigslist that you could pay $50 to $75 to go pretend that they're a prospective tenant, to go secret shop a property if you're out off site and not able to be there. So there's ways to do that. They can take pictures, they can whatever. So there's lots of unique ways to be able to do something like that. But that's a good question, Rama. Charles is asking, does your property manager's software link up with the software that you guys use, and what CRM and tracking software do you use? So what we use is the Yardie software, and they give us access to be able to log into their software, and so we have access to it at any point. And so we don't have a separate software that we use that links into theirs, but they give us all of the reports and all the data for us to be able to do our post our financial tracking and financial projections and modeling and stuff like that. So we don't have a property specific Yardie software and then a separate software that we use to analyze things. It's all on the same software. They just give us access to be able to use those particular softwares. And then the CRM that we use one for our investors called Contactually. And it is a very good tool to use. And of course, we use MailChimp as well. So, but as far as tracking, we have access to just jump into the software whenever we need to, pull reports and look at things and kind of see the occupancy levels and the financials and everything on a very transparent way. So we're not really too worried about having a separate software to be able to connect into that. Next question is, do you get access to the operating bank account of your property? My PM said it is one account, and AppFolio routes income and expenses to each property. Is that right? That does sound right. I mean, I would still, if it's an operating bank account, I would still try to have access to that just as a backup. I believe on the ones that we're using, we have the access to it, but we don't usually go into it or do anything with it. But they do have that transparency, and they have the ability to send those books and stuff to us so we can verify the inflow and the outflow of all the income and expenses to be able to do those balancing and those verifications. So last question here is from Joy. I'm not going to take any more questions because we're right around that 1 hour mark, a little bit longer than I thought, but hopefully you guys found that this was very useful for you. The question is coming from Joy. How do you ask a property manager for a pro forma if you haven't hired them yet? So that's kind of, Joy, why I went over this webinar today, because if you just called up a property management company and said, hey, I'm looking at buying this property down the street, can you give me a pro forma on how you think you could do? Yeah, they're probably not going to give you the time of day. But if you call up a property management company and say, hey, I'm a new investor in your market, and we're looking to acquire several different properties in your area, and we're looking at a property right now that is 3 miles down or 20 minutes away from your headquarters or whatever, I'd like to be able to set up a time to be able to discuss with you some questions that we have before we hire you. And then whenever you get on the phone call with them and ask them those questions, that's one of the questions that you ask. Hey, would you be willing to provide us with some pro forma projections on the expenses and how you think you can perform on this asset? I've never, ever had a property management company tell me no to that. But it's all about your confidence level and how you treat them in the beginning. Because remember, they're interviewing you just as well as you are interviewing them. So it's all about how they perceive you when you first make that initial contact. Don't just call them right away and say, hey, I need a pro forma. Go through that process. And that's why right now, if you're looking to enter a market and you don't have a deal yet, start to build your team now. The property manager is a very vital piece of your team. And even though you don't have a deal right now, start trying to find that property manager and interview them. And even if you don't have a property under contract, you're looking to acquire properties. And so find a property that is available to purchase in that market and get them started on that process of doing some of that underwriting. And they know that you don't have the property yet. They know it's still being bidded out, but you need to make sure that you start that process now. Don't wait until you have it under contract to be able to start that, because by that time it's too late, because you haven't even given them a chance to give you the pro formas before you've done your underwriting. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I hope you guys found that very useful. And just remember one more thing. We do have the summit coming up in June of this year. This is 2019. We're going to be doing the MFIN Summit in January as well as June. If you want some more information, it's a Multifamily Investor Nation conference. It's all online. It's a virtual conference. You can go to mfinsummit.com and register. We already have over 200 people registered for the event coming up in June. Had an amazing turnout for the one in January last month. So make sure you sign up for that. More details will be posted as they are available, but you can right now go and purchase your tickets and by going to mfinsummit.com. And also make sure that you go and subscribe to our podcast, which can be found at mfinpodcast.com, or you can search on the iTunes platform for the iTunes podcast called Multifamily Investor Nation. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we will be seeing you next week.